Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name's Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We've made it through another week, and I'm excited to start the weekend. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. If you're streaming on Twitter, and you do want to chat along, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live, or if you just want to watch, feel free to hang out on Twitter. Great place, right? Now, speaking of Twitter, let me hop over to my screen just for a second. I did share a preview of what we are going to be working on today, and here's that tweet. I get asked a lot, our whole team gets asked a lot, why don't you have a page on Behance for the Masterclasses? It's a very good question. I am not sure, actually. It's probably resources. We have to get, a team on the Behance side to design and code and all that fun stuff, right? So I figured maybe I'll take a shot at designing it myself during one of these masterclasses. So we're designing a masterclass page during an Adobe XD masterclass. Crazy, right? We got Oliver from the UK and Amer and Katya from Austria. Resolution. Hopefully my resolution looks okay. If not, on the YouTube video, you can click on the gear icon at the bottom right-hand corner and you can bump that up. We've got Courtney from South Africa and Barcelona. People from all over. Anita from Toronto. I know we have a lot of Canadians in the house. We've got Megan from Western Canada. Christine from Hamilton, Ontario. See, all the Canadians. It's amazing. It's wonderful. Thank you for joining for Masterclass number 46. We've been at this for 46 weeks. That's crazy. And it kind of just, pushes the point that we probably need a destination. We have myself and Terry and Jason and Paul and Kyle. We're all doing masterclasses every single Friday. That's a lot of content. Assuming we all do it on the Friday, that's 5 hours of content every single Friday. So we need a place to house all of our stuff. So what we're going to do is we are going to design out a landing page today. And we're going to, use some inspiration from Behance because it hopefully will eventually live on Behance. We may also use some inspiration from the adobe.com website. The XD team is putting out some wonderful pages. They just released a new page, the Learn Hub. I'm going to copy it and paste it in the chat. Some of you may have noticed that Let's XD has been transitioned to a lot of the content is now available here, plus content from Danny Beaumont, Matt Ray, a lot of different people, which is wonderful, right? So head on over there and check out the content. But we're also going to use some inspiration from this page, and this is one of our newer pages that went live, all about web design. Beautiful page, right? So I want to pull some inspiration from that. All right, so let's go ahead and begin. I'm going to hop over to Adobe XD, and we are going to start this process. So I have a bunch of Artboard presets up here at the top, as do you. And I'm going to go ahead and start nice and large. We are going to be designing this for the web. So I'm going to start with a 1920 by 1080 pixel Artboard. You can start larger, you can start smaller, completely up to you. And we are going to go ahead and get going. All right. So this is the first page that we're going to be designing out. We're probably only going to have time to design out one of the pages, but we'll see. We'll see how things go. So we're going to start off. I'm going to dive in here and just call this Masterclasses. And then we're going to start laying out the foundation of this page. If I hop over to Behance just for a second, we have this navigation bar at the top. It has a search field, has some icons over to the right, some logos, and then it has this kind of bar here with a bunch of categories. I really like that, and I think we can definitely bring that in for this masterclass page, considering we have so many different types of masterclasses: design, photography, XD, so on and so forth, right? So what I'm going to do is, starting at the top left-hand corner, we're going to start with a logo. So I'm going to hop over to Finder or Explorer on Windows, and I have some assets here I'm going to drag in. I have some SVGs, Behance, some mail icons, notification bell, Adobe Logos. So I'll just drag all of these directly in, and I can start adding these as assets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into my assets panel down here at the bottom, and I'm going to turn this into a component. I'm going to turn this one into a component, and this one, just so I have them. And if we do have multiple pages, I'll be able to very quickly update them just once, and it'll propagate everywhere, which is great, right? So we've got our logo. I'm going to make sure to name this Behance. And eventually we'll also start adding in some colors and character styles and so on and so forth. All right. So this is going to go at the top left-hand corner. And if we take a quick peek one more time, you're noticing the navigation bar, the logos go almost to the edge, right? There is a little bit of padding over there. And we could drag out a guide from the left-hand side. Whoop. Did I miss it? I missed it, didn't I? 32 pixels could work. We'll try that. We can always adjust that at some point later. And then over to the right, we're going to grab these icons. We can also drag out a guide from the top as well. And I'm also going to drag one out all the way over to the left. And this will be 32 pixels from the right. Beautiful. All right. Now, beside this Adobe logo, if we take one more quick peek at Behance, we have a profile. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, shortcut key E, drag out an ellipse. Now it does look like it's a little bit larger, so I'm going to make it a little bit larger than the logo. Maybe I'll center this logo. And for the image, I'm actually going to hop over to my libraries. So I'm going to go to my assets, go back to my libraries, and I do have a library that I created with all the amazing toy faces that Amrit has created. Cody will definitely put a link in the chat if you want to check those out, but I do have a Howard toy face. Let me just make this bigger. Look at that. It's me. I'm even wearing my glasses today. It's so cute. If you do want your own custom toy face, Amrit does sell them. I think he's still selling them on his website, which Cody will probably put a link in just a few moments. There's a bit of a delay in the chat, so I think what you're seeing is about 15 seconds behind what I'm actually saying. So there we go. I'm going to put this notification bell right about here. I do want to make sure that there's a little bit of padding, and we can use stacks in just a moment once I get everything lined up really nicely. Those look pretty good. And I'm going to select all this information. I want to make sure that they're all vertically aligned, and I'm also going to group all this information. I'm going to call this right. And then over within the properties inspector, we are going to turn on a stack. And this is going to allow us to not only dive in here and swap the position of these elements as needed, but we can also adjust the spacing. So if I wanted to, I can dive in, hold down my shift key and adjust the spacing all at once. Somewhere around 30 looks pretty good, or we can go maybe 24. We can try that, see what that looks like. And of course, if you did add additional icons, so if I duplicate this, right, it's going to add another one, and it's going to push everything away quite nicely. All right, so that's looking good over there. We've got our Behance logo on the left-hand side. I'm actually going to make sure that this is lined up in the center. Let me bump this up a little bit. Perfect, and I'm gonna select all this information. I'm going to group it. Whoop, I hit it. G, not H. Command and Control G, I'll call this nav. All right, so with that nav in place, we may want, right beside this logo, we may want some links. And we're gonna get to some of the good stuff in just a moment, but I do wanna set up the foundation of this page just so that we can have a better sense of what it looks like as it's coming together. So I'm gonna grab my text tool, shortcut key T. I'm going to click, and I'll just replicate what is on Behance. This first one does say for you, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, for you, discover live streams and jobs. So we're going to go ahead, and for the typeface, I am going to be using Adobe Clean, which is an internal typeface, so it's not available for the public, but there are similar ones. And now I believe on Behance, they do use Acumen Pro, but I'm going to switch it up a little bit, just kind of move it towards Adobe Clean. Let's go for bold and maybe 22 for the size. And I'm going to just drop this to a almost pure black. And links are another good opportunity to showcase how stacks can work. So if I pop this link into a group, Command and Control G, and call this links, I'm going to turn on a stack within the property inspector one more time. It's going to automatically define this as a horizontal stack. And I can dive in here and duplicate and duplicate and duplicate And now I have 4 links, right? And of course, just like before, I can hold down Shift and adjust. And you're going to notice as I'm going to change this to say discover, it's going to automatically push everything away, bring things forward as I make those changes. And this would be live streams. And then we're going to have jobs over to the right. There we go. There, it looks like people in the chat on Behance are keeping tally of where people are from in Canada. 2 from Toronto, 2 from Hamilton, 1 from Petawawa. Where is that? Where is Petawawa? That's not a place that I've heard. But it sounds very exotic. And I guess since I am from Toronto, I'm not living there now, but I am from there, you can add that in there as well. All right, so that looks pretty good. Now, as you navigate through the different pages on Behance, there is an active indicator. It's a very little line right at the bottom here, right? And there's a very subtle line down below. So we may want to put those as well. Now, what you don't want to do is inside of this group that has a stack enabled, if I were to grab my line tool and start creating one, right? It's going to do exactly what a stack is supposed to do. It's going to push the elements away and allow me to create that item right there, right? 3 Toronto, yes. So what we want to do instead is make sure we're outside of that group, or you can go ahead, if it's always going to be part of, let's say, Discover, then you can group Discover and then put that line inside of that group. But since it's going to be moving around, I'm going to put it outside of the group, grab the line one more time, and maybe we'll just do this underneath live streams. I'm going to make sure that I'm using the same color, which, by the way, I should probably add to my assets. I can add the colors. I can also add the character styles as well. And this line I'm going to make a little bit larger. Looks pretty good. And just make sure it lines up. Now, one thing I stress all the time, and I'm sure some of you are already rolling your eyes because you hear it every single stream, is when you're designing very zoomed in like I'm doing right now, like I do all the time, go ahead and hit the play button at the top, or have this preview window on a different display. Pop it on your iPad if you want to. And just to help you really visualize how things are. Because when you're designed this close, you lose that perspective. And things may look great when you're super zoomed in, but then you zoom out eventually, and it's like, right? Oh, Petawawa is close to Ottawa, so not exotic, that's true. Okay, I didn't know that. I should visit next time I'm in that area. All right, the final thing we're going to do at this top section is just add one more line that's going to go all the way across the artboard, right? And this is going to be just a very subtle line. We're going to make sure to move it behind our active indicator, move it down a touch, and it's going to be a very subtle line. It's there, but it's also not there. All right. Someone's asking, can we use a grid 12 or 16 columns for some of the next landing pages? I mean, I don't know if you're asking if I should do it or if you can in general. You can in general. Will I do it? I don't know, maybe. You can, right? But I'm not going to. I'm lazy. All right, so we've got everything looking pretty good. And now what we're going to start doing is we're going to start the process of building out this right down here, right? So which is, allow us to have some different categories for our various masterclasses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my rectangle and I'm going to draw out the first one. Now, since I know, just double checking the count, since I know there will be 5 of these categories going across this artboard, and it's going to line up really nicely with our guides on the left, so 32 pixels from the left and the right, which might be a little bit squishy, but we're going to run with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this one rectangle, because the last thing you want to do is you have a rectangle, you think it'll probably line up. Nice haircut, thank you so much. So last thing you want to do is add it to a repeat grid, drag out a few, realize they don't really line up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would have to really increase the spacing, which looks a little bit strange, right? And it's not consistent with the Behance landing page. So what I'm going to do instead is I have my first shape, and I'll get to styling in a second. I'm going to drag the shape all the way to the guide on the right. It's going to snap nicely into place. And again, since I know there are going to be 5 of them, inside of the properties inspector, we can do some math, right? Everyone loves math. I don't. But I'm going to do a slash, which is divide by 5. And this will allow this particular shape to perfectly line up. So if I were to use a repeat grid now, drag out 5, I would have to drag back, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I missed some of it. I would basically have to go to 0 to make it line up perfectly. So what I also like to do, if I go back, is in addition to this slash 5 or divide by 5, just bring it in by about 8 pixels, right? And now, if I were to use a repeat grid or a stack or whatever it is that I'm going to be using, I can drag this out. There are my 5, right? And I can adjust the spacing. There we go. And it's about 8 pixels. I missed a pixel, but that's fine, right? And it fits perfectly. So now I can start styling this if I wanted to. So I can dive in here. Let's go ahead and round out the corners a little bit. We'll try, what are we at now? Let's try 8 pixels. There we go. And now we want to actually start putting some content inside of here. And it's going to consist of a few things. A background image. It's going to consist of a text layer and also an overlay, which we're going to get to in just a second with components. So I'm going to hop over to Finder again. And inside of this folder, I have some headers created by some of the amazing evangelists on our team, Paul Tranny, Terry White, Jason, Kyle, myself. So I'm going to start. And let's say, so we've got one from Paul. Now I can go ahead and select all of these, drag them all in at once, or select all of them, but I want to be particular which ones I'm dragging in there. So I'm going to drag this one in, and then we've got photography from Terry. So I'll drag this rose in that he shot. And after that, and I'm doing this in order of the streaming hours, we've got this from Jason, and then I am up after Jason. So I'm going to grab this one. And then Kyle has so many amazing pieces because he's just a great artist. I believe he drew this one, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check. Yeah, I believe he did. So I'm going to drag this one in. And now we have the backgrounds of all of our lovely evangelists, right? Now, at this point, if I were to simply grab the text tool inside of this repeat grid and type out something like design, let's make a few changes. I'm going to change this to white, and we're going to go, let's go for black for the text. We want this to really stand out. I'm going to bump this up in size just a little bit. We want to make sure that something like photography is going to fit nicely, right? And it looks like it probably will. I'm going to make sure to center this. Now, you're probably noticing a problem, right? On this one here, you can definitely read photography. Looks great. This one over here, not so great, because the image in the background, there's a lot going on, right? There's Paul's face. I don't know what's happening to his face, but it's a beautiful piece that he created, but we can't see design very well. If you squint, possibly, but if you have to squint to see something, that likely means that somebody else cannot see it, because people have visual impairments. So you have to pay attention to those sorts of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a layer below this. And this is going to be our overlay. And we're going to be using component states to make sure that we can have a hover effect. Great to see you, Marcos, and everyone else who is joining. As a reminder, if you're tuning in on Twitter, I cannot see the chat over there. Actually, I don't think there is chat. So head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live so we can chat along. So I'm going to name this categories. And I'm going to select this image in the background, which right now contains Paul's face. I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to change this to black. And then I'm going to just drop the opacity to, let's say, about 70%. Devin is saying, first time joining on Behance. I'm usually on YouTube. Great to see you. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. And by doing that, right, we can now see the text. We can see the white text on a background. It's a little bit darker, and there are some nice images behind it. We can still see those as well. And you can experiment with the different opacity. You can go down to 60% maybe. I probably wouldn't go much lower than that. 60 might pass, but in this image here, it's a little bit muddy. So I'm gonna go back to 70. Now, another thing we want to do is we want to create a hover effect so that when someone does hover, which before I do that, I'm going to name this audio and video because Jason does both. And I do I mean, it's mostly XD, but I'll just do UI and UX. And then Kyle does illustration. All right. So now we want to go ahead and create a hover effect. Now, one thing we don't want to do, hey, Andres, great to see you. One thing we don't want to do is we don't want to use the image in the background and turn that into a component, because then we break some of the functionality that Repeat Grid offers. So what I love to do is create separate overlays that are separate from the images in the background or whatever else might be present. So I do have this darker box selected. I'm going to go ahead inside of the Properties Inspector or the Assets, turn this into a component. Now, what you're going to notice, this is very important, is because we are inside of a Repeat Grid, and this is relatively new, it turned this component into an instance, so it is not the main component. So keep that in mind. If I were to edit this particular instance, it would not push those changes to the other components inside of this Repeat Grid, right? So we're going to press the pencil icon, and it's going to pop out this particular component so that we can edit it. And all we're going to do, it's going to be very simple, is we're going to press the plus button one more time, and we're going to create a hover state. Now, it is wired up by default, as indicated by that lightning icon over to the right. However, because it's wired up as with auto animate, there's really nothing that's going to be animating. So we're going to change that in just a second. Is there a benefit of prototyping for the developer? I'm not sure I understand that question completely, but I mean, if I do understand it, there's a lot of benefits to prototyping for the developer. One, it allows them to see the actual website or app or whatever it might be in action, so they can kind of visualize what it's going to look like. And they can also export their assets through design specs and so on and so forth. But the big thing is being able to actually see what it's going to look like once it's live. So I'm going to go ahead and create a hover state. And all we're going to do in this case is we're going to dive in here and we're going to change the color to a nice blue. I actually like this blue that we use for the highlight color, so I'll choose that. I'm going to bump the opacity up to 100%. And now we have our default state and we have our hover state. And like I mentioned, even though it's wired up by default, I like hopping into prototype mode and just, making sure that it's switched over to transition with no animation, because there is nothing to really animate. You could, in this case, if you want to animate between the two different colors, is you can do a dissolve. And I would definitely recommend maybe no easing with a very quick duration. So if I do go ahead and press play, we can now see that we have a little bit of a dissolve going on. Now, the one benefit of no animation is that you won't have to wait for each one to complete, right? So if I go back here and change this to none, now I can just view, right? Just like that. And if you wanted to, you can also maybe bring down the opacity a little bit on this, maybe not as much as 70%, but maybe 85, just so you can see a little bit of that image in the background, right? And it looks pretty fancy. Question about preferences. Is there a unit and increment adjustment coming soon? I don't know, but I know that it's something that the team has been thinking about. Preferences in specific, Andrew Shorten on Twitter did confirm that they're looking into it. Maybe there are some things we can put inside of preferences in XD, and something like 10 pixels versus 8 pixels for the nudge, or I guess 8 versus 10, is something that a lot of designers want. So that could be something that might be in there, but I don't know when that might be coming or what might be in there. But definitely, either tweet it at the team or make sure to upvote it on user voice. All right, so this looks pretty good, right? We've got our different categories up here at the top. And now what we want to do is we're going to move on and we're going to add a header, a nice big header at the top. So if anyone's landing on this page, they know exactly what they just landed on. So I'm going to grab the text tool, shortcut key T, and we're going to type out Adobe. Whoops, I should probably change the color. Adobe Masterclasses. There we go. And now this is kind of small. Hey, Sam, great to see you. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this up, make this nice and large. Let's go for something around, I don't know, maybe 76 pixels. It's a nice number, right? And we'll stick with black for the weight, because this is, a header that's going to really stand out. And I'll pop it somewhere in this area here. Now for the color, we may want to add a little bit of blue in there, or maybe like bluish purple, that sort of thing. Very subtle though. something in this area. Again, you want to make sure that people can read this, right? So we've got a nice header, and since I'm going to be using similar character styles throughout this project, I'm going to make sure, again, to add this as a character style. I'm going to add this as a color so I can very easily get to that. Does Adobe have plans for dark mode? I don't know. I mean, so the short answer is that I think it's fair to say everyone on the team wants dark mode, right? Because users want it. It's a challenge. It's not only a technical challenge, an engineering challenge. It requires designers, which we have to budget for. It requires work across various teams at Adobe because we do have an overall design system. It also requires us to work on dark mode for both operating systems, Windows and Mac, right? So it's a big challenge. And then there's, of course, priorities. Do we prioritize dark mode over better prototyping features or better design features? The answer is probably no, right? So eventually, I'm sure dark mode will happen, but it's not a priority and it's quite challenging. All right, so the next thing underneath this, we may want a subheader to let people know what exactly is a masterclass and maybe some additional details about it. So I'm going to grab the text tool. Now, instead of simply clicking with the text tool, whoops, T, there we go. So instead of simply clicking, which will create a point text, I'm going to click and drag out a box. This will define an auto height text box. So if I start typing over, 400, I think it's like 400 hours, might be closer to 500 hours of free Photoshop, right? And you're noticing when I got to the end, it automatically bumped it down. Now, this is sub information. It's header number 2. So much smaller, right? So I'm going to drop this down to about, let's say 34 pixels, and Adobe Clean is good. Let's drop this down to about medium. Oh, I don't have medium. That's a problem, right? We'll do regular. Regular is good too. All right, so Photoshop and audio, video, UI, UX, and illustration. Training from some of the best in the industry. I might be a bit biased there, but I think we're pretty good, if I can spell correctly, right? There we go. All right, so I'm gonna pop that there, give it a little bit of spacing here. And then right below, one of the big requests that we get is, this looks okay, is, people want to be able to search our masterclasses. We have so many of them. So let's add a quick search box. So I'll drag one out. We'll make this nice and large so people can see it. And for this one, in this text layer, we brought in a little bit of blue, and we may want to do the same for this. So we're going to go to blue, maybe bring in a little, ooh, that's a nice color. Subtle, right? But it's nice. And then inside, we might want to type out search our masterclasses. Now this, we're going to make sure that it is left aligned. We may want to drop it in size a little bit. 34 might be too big, so maybe 24. And then over to the left, we're going to want a search icon. So there's lots of ways you can get search icons. If you have them in a third-party icon manager or a library, you can do that, or you can hop into your plugins. And I do have the Icons for Design plugin installed. Let's type out search. It's a wonderful plugin. There we go. Bring it on down here. Let's go ahead and sample this color here. Now, maybe for these subheaders, right, and maybe search our masterclasses, we right now have this darker color. We may want to just brighten that up just a little bit. So I'm just going to drag this up just a touch. You don't want to go too much, right? Just a tiny little bit. I'm going to add that color. That way I can just apply it to all these different things. Right click, apply as border. Beautiful. Possibly, I don't know, I might darken that a little bit later, but what we can do is just right click, press edit, and then just edit it once. There we go. All right, search icon looks pretty good. Make sure that is, it's about 24 pixels. All right, I'm gonna group this, make sure it's in the center. Now I think the search bar is a little bit too wide, so I'm gonna just drop it a little bit. All right, it might stand out a little bit too much, but It's not bad. I think it'll do. It will do. All right. Sam says, Chris, great to see you. Chris, what's your favorite plugin? I feel like Chris is possibly fishing. Chris. What's my favorite plugin? That's a very good question. Well, I may be biased here, but Fancy Maps is probably one of my favorite because I designed it and developed it with, I didn't develop it, well, Walter Camaro developed it. I designed it though, so a little bit biased there. Let's see, what else is a good plugin? UI Faces. I mean, UI Faces, what can I say? It's wonderful. And there's a few others. Glitch is fun. Google Sheets I use all the time. But great to see you, Chris. All right. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to group all this information. I'm going to call this search. And if I did feel like I would be using this in various places, I could turn this into a component as well. But I do want to move on. All right. One more thing we can do at this top section is group all this information here. And I'm going to call this header. And then I can also turn a stack on here. Now you're going to notice, if you haven't used stacks before, it defines the stack based on the layout of the content. So right now the content's going up top to bottom. So it defined it as vertical, which is great, right? So I can just dive in here. If I wanted search at the top, I can very easily do that. Or if I added some more text, you're going to notice it automatically pushes that search box down. And I can go ahead and adjust the padding as necessary. Might be a little, it's not too bad. I'm going to push this up a little bit. A little bit more. I'm particular. There we go. I can also do that inside of the Properties Inspector as well. Alrighty, so now down below we may want one quick row that shows off which masterclasses have taken place recently, right? So what I'm going to do is, we already have this shape up here. That's the perfect size. It's exactly the size that we want. So I'm going to copy this shape and actually paste it outside. Now we're not going to use this as a thumbnail, but I do want to use that as the shape. And if I do hop over to Finder, I have some images of our thumbnails. I'm going to drag that in just so that I can make sure that it's the right size, which is right about there. These thumbnails are 16 by 9. Hey, Tayab, great to see you. What you can also do if you want to make sure it's exactly the right size is do something like 1280, create a rectangle 1280 by 720, for example. And then just shrink it on down, right? But this one looks pretty good. Now, above this, we may want a quick header to let people know what this is. So this might be latest Adobe Masterclasses. If I can spell correctly. I never spell correctly. I'm thinking my brain is moving too quickly as I'm doing these streams. I'm going to left align it. Let's drop this to about 28, a little bit smaller. And we're going to go for, let's go for bold. And then we're going to grab that darker color that we used earlier. All right. Now below each of these thumbnails, we may want some brief information on what this masterclass is. Now, I should mention that this is the landing page that people are going to see when they navigate to this page and there is not a masterclass currently going like there is right now. Ideally, if they were to go to this page and there is a stream going, it would show that, but we'll get to that another day. All right, so here we're going to do, we may want a title, so I'm actually going to duplicate this, but I might want to drop this down to about 22, a little bit smaller. And then right down here, maybe some information about Paul and what stream it was or what day it was streamed. I'll drag out a lovely ellipse for the profile picture. And then Paul Tranny. And we might drop this to, let's try regular, and probably want to drop this in size as well. And then a dot. Dots are fun, right? And then let's say it was March, what day is today? March 19th. So that's the day it's streamed. I'm going to group all this information. And this is another opportunity to use stacks as well. And if I hop over to my layers, I'm going to name this info or metadata or whatever you want to call it. Turn a stack on. And this will be really helpful when, if I double click on this and change this to like Howard Pinsky, right? I don't have to worry about rearranging everything after that. It just automatically does it. Are these live streams a regular thing? Absolutely. So the schedule is down below somewhere, but the masterclasses, all 5 of us do masterclasses every Friday, except when we have the occasional day off. And mine are always 1 o'clock, or I guess 12 o'clock Pacific time. All right, that looks a little bit large. I'll drop that. Let's move this up. All right, that will do. I think. Looks pretty good? I think so. All right, I can worry about the spacing and really tweak this stuff a little bit later on, but I think that's pretty good. Maybe, let's try 8. Yeah, okay. That will work. So we have the first one in place, and now what we want to do is create the additional 5s. So I'm going to select all of this, Command and Control G or Command and Control R to place into a repeat grid, and boop, there we go. And I'm going to drag out our 4 more. Now what you're noticing, and XD is kind of smart as it did this, right? It brought in because this one was used in the previous repeat grid, it brought in those images up there, which is pretty cool. You're also doing a DCC today at 2. Oh, so those DCCs this week and next week are replays. So I will not be actually live, but it'll be the replay of the previous one. And then I think the week after that, we have a new host that will be hosting. Makes sense, right? Can prototype preview be exported or shared as a PDF? So you can definitely export as PDF. You go File, Export, and then you can do selected artboards, or you can do everything that is marked for export, or just, all artboards, and you can choose PDF in that dialog. You can also create a link. So if I go to share mode, for example, this is my home artboard. I can go ahead and share for design review, development, presentation, user testing, a lot of different presets, or you can customize one of your own, and you can share that. And if you have your prototype wired up, or if there are component states that are animated, anyone with that link will be able to access it and see that in action. All right, so I'm going to dive in here and just make some quick changes. This will just be title of master. I guess this would be, so Paul does the design masterclasses and Terry does photography. Photography, great word. I won't bother doing all of those, but I do have the thumbnails in here that I do want to replace, so I'll just drag them all directly into this grid, and that looks a little bit better, doesn't it? I think so. All right, I will group this information. Latest master classes. There we go. And move this on down. All right. It's coming along. I'm going to go ahead and make this artboard a little bit longer, because what I want to do down here is have different sections for the various masterclasses that we offer. Design, photography, so on and so forth. Maybe you can add the time to date. Oh, that we can definitely do that as well. So, and the nice thing about that is if I dive in here, I can just either add a separate layer, or I can do it, actually, I'll probably want a separate layer, because if I were to edit just this text layer, right? Let's say 1 o'clock, because I edited an existing text layer, if I scroll over here, it did not push those changes, because you can override text layers inside of a repeat grid. However, if I select this layer here, or I could select both of these layers and duplicate, right? It's gonna push everything away. I can move this over, and here I can change this to, let's say, 1 o'clock. So now I have an extra layer over here that I can dive in and do like 2 o'clock. Those aren't the correct times, but you get the idea, right? But that is a good suggestion. All right. Now, down below here, like I mentioned, we may want some different sections for each masterclass. So I'm going to grab the rectangle. I'm going to draw one out, all the way across. I'm not too concerned about the size, because we're going to be adding padding in just a moment. So it's going to automatically adjust. And for the color, I'm going to go for this nice blue, which is similar to the color we've been using previously. And then at the top, we might want to kick it off with some information. Now, we already have some text up here that we can possibly use. So I'm actually going to go ahead and copy these layers and bring them down here. I'm going to change these to white because it is against this blue background. And this is going to be the Design Masterclass. And for this one, we're going to type out, let's say, join Paul Tranny as he guides you through workflows to improve your skills. Now here I might want to, bring this text in a little bit. And I may even consider bumping up the size just a touch. There we go. Perfect. Now, down below this area, because the Design Masterclasses are always hosted by Paul Tranny, we may want a few buttons to not only view all the masterclasses in this particular category, but also maybe follow Paul on Behance, get some integration going in there. So I'm going to grab the rectangle. And, before I do that, actually, let me show you how padding helps in this situation. So I have this top section looking pretty good, right? It's about 87. I don't know. Actually, it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter how far it is from the top. I'm going to select all this information, pop it into a group, which I'll call Design. And then I'm going to make sure to turn padding on within the Properties Inspector. You can also turn on a stack if you want to. Probably not going to need to rearrange these objects, so I'm just going to turn padding on. And it's going to automatically define that padding based on, in this case, these two text layers and the layer at the back, which is our background. Background could be a single layer. It could be a group of layers. It can be a mask, a Boolean object, a lot of different things. Can we make an image carousel based on time, not have them draggable in XD? Okay, so if you're talking about time triggers in XD, definitely something the team wants to get to, maybe working on. Can't talk too much about what's in the works just yet, but definitely on their roadmap. And it's a big project, as you can imagine. So yeah, eventually, probably. All right, so we did define the padding, and right now at the top we have 85 pixels. It's probably not ideal, but if I go ahead and add 85 to the bottom, there we go. That looks pretty good. So now if I dive in here, and let's say I want to create a button, as I'm creating this object, the bottom padding is moving on over, or down, I should say. So here will be one button, and in the middle, let's say View All, and I'll sample this color here. Whoops, that wasn't what I wanted to do. There we go. Now that's a little bit too large, so I'm going to go ahead and drop this to, let's say, 24. I'm going to bold it because it is a call to action, and make sure it's in the center here. Whoop. All right, that looks pretty good. Now for this one, because we're going to be using a lot of buttons in these various sections, I am going to turn this into a component. Now Sam is asking, will Let's XD be updated, or is it now all on the Learn Hub? So yeah, Let's XD has been sunsetted. Eventually, the homepage will redirect to the Learn Hub, but they're finalizing a few things to make sure that all the content is moved over. But yeah, Let's XD eventually will just kind of drift off into the wind. So I'm going to go ahead and press the plus button to create our default state. This will be called button, and we may want to create a few additional states for this particular button, right? So I'm going to press the plus button one more time, create a new state, not a hover state, although we could do hover states, but new state's fine. This will be outlined. And I'm also going to outline, let's say, white. And with that, I'm going to dive in. We're going to set a border, and we'll bump this up a little bit and change this color. And this might be, let's say, follow. Whoops. One thing I should do, because this button may resize, on the default state, I'm going to enable padding. Just like we did with this overall box, I'm going to enable padding on the buttons as well. And because I did that on our default state, it also pushed that to our instance and our states as well. So if I go ahead and type out follow Paul, it's going to automatically resize, right? So now I can duplicate this over, change it over to white, 16 pixels, or I can just grab these, put them into a group, and call this, let's say, buttons, and turn a stack on. So if we did decide maybe follow Paul might be the primary button, we can just switch that over, right? There we go. And I'll make sure that this is centered. Perfect. All right, now down below, we may want Paul's streams. Now we already have a carousel right here that we can definitely use. So I'm gonna dive in here, I'm gonna select this entire repeat grid, copy it, dive into this group, paste it, and drag it down. And again, because we have padding enabled on this group, it pushed it down, which is wonderful, right? All right. Timothy from Jamaica, just starting to learn XD. Welcome, Timothy. Great to have you. I'm gonna go ahead and change the color of these elements to white. There we go. And of course, you know, this will definitely change because this will basically all be Paul's face, right? There we go. It's a lot of Paul, right? But that looks pretty good. Just move this background in a little bit. We don't need that much. And the reason that happened is because when I pasted this carousel, which extended all the way down here, it preserved that padding. So previously, the padding on the sides, because it looked at the text layers, was like 300 and something. So I pasted this carousel in, and it kept the 300 padding on the sides, which it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Sam said, got another, I saw something. Can you do that one more time? Oh yeah, so Let's XD, sunset, transitioned. It's still there for now. It'll eventually completely redirect, but yeah, Let's XD is now the Learn Hub, which is on adobe.com. All right. What is one piece of advice you give to a junior designer that you wish someone told you when you were in their shoes? Oh boy, Courtney, that's a big question. What is one piece of, it's changed so much. The industry has changed so much since I was at the age of a junior designer, or I guess you can be a junior designer at any age, really. I would say, you know, don't really listen to what people say, especially on the internet, about what your work, unless they're giving very constructive feedback. A lot of people on the internet, it's not very constructive, and it could be very deteriorating, right? A lot of nasty things. And I've seen a lot of designers get discouraged and just kind of drift off into the wind and never design again because of that. I would also say practice, and don't limit yourself. Many moons ago, when I was first getting into design, there were a lot of people who designed one specific thing, and that's all they did. And it was like those banners you put on forums and things like that. And though, you know, it's great, right? But it's not, you got to be more flexible. So design websites, design apps. Even if you don't want to be an app designer, design everything, because it's going to let you, it's going to expose yourself to so many different fields, and maybe you'll end up liking them. And you'll also learn various talents along the way. And of course, you know, if you're designing websites, you'll probably have to design a mobile version of that website, which will help tremendously. And the final thing, don't be afraid for personal purposes to copy people's work. You know, of course, don't post it publicly as your own, but if you hop over to Behance or Readable or whatever, go through the, over here, I have the UI and UX section, right? Wrong section. UI and UX, right? There's a lot of beautiful stuff, and you can sort this by, you know, icon design, UI and UX, whatever it might be. And if you see something that's very striking, or if you see a common theme, like this one, right? You might love this, and you might see very similar things. Copy this. Go in XD or whatever application you use. Copy this, and do it again, and again, and again, and again, until you can do it without looking at this, right? And that'll just help you. You know, it'll help you with character styles, it'll help you with spacing, it'll help you with so many different things. And of course, this is in addition to reading books or watching YouTube videos or LinkedIn Learning or whatever it might be, right? How do you determine which is constructive and which isn't? Well, if someone says your designs suck, not constructive, right? But if someone's saying you should consider using a serif instead of a sans serif in this situation, or pay attention to accessibility, you know, the text is not readable, or space things out. That's another big advice I give people. Let things breathe. I see a lot of people, if I were to do it on here, especially early on designers, they'll do something like this. They'll do this, and they'll move this up, and they'll move this, and they'll do this, because they want to make sure that everything is on one page. No. Let things breathe. And that allows you to really focus on the user experience. Because if you do have a lot of content that's eventually going to go down your artboard or down your website or mobile app or whatever it might be, then think about how you're going to get people down there. Are you going to put an arrow? Are you going to put, maybe in this case, we might take this, because if you take a look at this, right, you might not know that something's down there. So maybe you'll just take this blue box a little bit and just move it on up a touch. And of course, you'd have to maybe space this out a little bit, right? But all of a sudden, there's that blue box down there. What's down there? Ah, more stuff, right? So let things breathe and allow the user experience to guide your users through the website or the apps. So there's a lot of things that those are some suggestions. There's probably a lot more. If anyone in the chat has additional bits of feedback to give for a junior designer, throw them in there. I'm curious, right? So let things breathe. And even in this situation, I would probably let, especially this and this, I would probably add more. But we do need a way to let people know that there's something else down there. And it's going to differ from screen to screen. So keep that in mind too. So I have this one in place, and I might want to use a few additional, or add a few additional ones. So I'm going to group this one, and I'll call this sections. And I'm going to turn a stack on, vertical stack, and duplicate, right? Maybe we don't want any padding. Now for this one, we may want to switch up the colors a little bit because the blue on the blue on the blue, probably not going to work. So I'm going to actually switch this over to a nice lighter blue. Now this one is going to be the photography masterclass. Now the white text on the lighter blue background, probably not going to work. So this is an opportunity to go to our darker text for both of these, right? And then these buttons also possibly not going to work. So what we might want to do is kind of invert this. And what I would do is inside of the main component, which is this little guy up. Where's the, oh yeah, the main component is now down here because I duplicated the main and made the changes. So go to the main component, add a new state. This might be solid and then blue. And we're going to go ahead and change the background to our blue, text to white. And we're also going to add one more state, outlined blue. And this will simply be our blue. I should probably add that blue to my assets at some point, right? I'm going to do that now. Boop. There we go. Now, as I'm looking at this, right, we've got, so I'm going to change this to solid blue and outline blue. This will be follow Terry. As I'm looking at this, the buttons are a little bit muddy. And that's probably because this background is not light enough. So I'm going to just brighten it up a little bit just so that buttons, there we go. That looks a little bit better. All right. Can you have two image-based carousels on the same page, both being triggered to move back and forth with their own individual separate buttons? You can, right? If I'm understanding correctly, you can. Drag, that's a different story. You can't drag left or right unless you have individual hotspots. But yeah, you can have two image-based carousels. If they have buttons, you put them all into a single component with two different states, and then you can trigger back and forth between them all on one single artboard. Maybe next masterclass, I will get to that. So there's the photography masterclass. The copy is completely wrong, obviously, but I do want to get through a little bit more. Oh, and this is wrong too. Select this and change this to this color. Maybe I can go, hey, that's fine. This I'll just change to blue. Again, that's not, Paul Tranny doesn't do the photography masterclasses, but that's fine. Now the next one down, we may want to do the audio video. So that one is Jason. So I'm going to duplicate, I should probably rename this photo. I'm going to duplicate this one. And because we're inside of a stack, phew, just like that. Now audio video, it's more on the purple side because Premiere, Audition, After Effects. So this blue, I'm just going to shift a little bit to the purple. Not too much, just a little bit. And I might want to dive in here to this instance and just override that. Audio, video, right? And then we'll do one more down here. Whoops. And this might be UI and UX with me. And then this one might be illustration. And maybe we'll go back to, so illustration's more like on the orange side, but orange, I don't know if it's gonna, oops. I don't know if the orange is gonna work in this case. I mean, maybe. We'd have to play around with exactly what color that is. But it could work, possibly. I'm not loving the white on the orange. That's the color. You can tell the stream is over, right? I can't even think about words. But we're going to wrap things up here. Kyle T. Webster, speaking of masterclasses and the illustration masterclass, Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few minutes. And if I missed your question, definitely shoot me a tweet. Follow me on Twitter so I can check that out. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Stick around, Kyle T. Webster. Oh, wait, hold on. Is he coming up? No, he may not be coming up. I think he had to reschedule today. So he may not be coming up today, but there might be something, I don't know, something's going on after this stream. But a big thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Make sure to follow me on Twitter. I'm going to be back next week with another masterclass, and I will see you all next time.